What's up, guys? So as promised, I'm going to be sharing a few recipes that help me get ready for the photo shoot. I believe fully that any recipe that's out there, you can make it as healthy as possible. So the first recipe I'm going to be sharing is for a healthier version of shepherd's pie. So as is shown in the video, the first step to do is to bring water to a boil and put the potato of your liking into that boiling water. The thing about boiling potatoes is that it depends on what type of potato you're using will determine how long it's going to take to boil. So for example, in this video, I'm using golden potatoes, and normally those take about 20 to 30 minutes. However, again, based on the type and the size, it may or may not take longer. So you're going to keep those potatoes in the boiling water until you poke a fork and it breaks through the potato easily. That's when you'll know it's done. So while the potatoes are boiling, there's a few other steps that we can do before we kind of complete the shepherd's pie and put in the oven. So the first thing I like to do is cut up my vegetables. Now, a good rule of thumb is when you're cutting up your vegetables or cutting up any ingredients in general, you should try to cut up vegetables and fruits before you cut up meat. And the reason being is because you don't want to cross-contaminate whatever you're cutting on your cutting board. So if you want to spend less time cleaning and more time, getting your ingredients together, then my suggestion is cut up your fruits and vegetables first, and even stuff like potatoes and whatnot. And then once that's done, go ahead and cut up your meat. So what I'm doing here is for the carrots, I cut off the ends because those ends in my mind are completely useless, but again, it's up to your liking. I am then peeling the carrots of their rough outer skin. I do that for all the carrots that I will be using, and then once I'm done with that, I cut up the carrots into bite-sized pieces. So a good rule of thumb when you're cutting up vegetables, depending on what recipe that you're using or like what is the overall aesthetic, I guess you could say, for the recipe is, you want to cut it up according to like what's the recommended bite size, or like for example, if you want to get every taste of every ingredient in one bite, you'll cut up to that size. So after I peel the carrots, I'm cutting up to a size that once the shepherd's pie is done, you can get a little taste of every ingredient in the shepherd's pie in one forkful or spoonful. Now, once the carrots are done, the next thing I put together, or take out, I shall say, are peas. Now, the thing about peas is you can go as organic as you want, so you can try and find peas that are not in a can, or you can use it in a can as I'm doing. And a good thing to look for when you are, using vegetables from a can, what you'll look for, or one thing you should be very cognizant about, is the sodium, the amount of sodium within that can. So before you pick any canned fruits or vegetables that are coming off the shelves, look at the sodium level. A good amount of time, the sodium content is very high. So although that it's very hard or very rare to find canned goods that has very low amount of sodium, just go ahead and when you're at the food store, compare the different amounts of sodium between different brands. For this recipe, what I did is I chose canned goods for both the sweet peas and the corn. So again, what I did is when I went to the food store, I chose not only an organic brand. Out of most of the canned goods on the shelf, I picked the canned sweet peas and corn that had the lowest amount of sodium content. You open up the cans, you just drain any excess water that is not needed and put it in a container and off to the side, so that when we're ready to assemble the shepherd's pie, everything is readily available. I totally forgot about this before I continue, buy enough ingredients based on like the amount of servings you want to make. So for this recipe, I put in like 5 to 6 potatoes, 1 can of both sweet corn and sweet peas, 5 carrots, and then a can of tomato puree. And then we'll get to, how much meat that we're using. But before you go ahead and you start cooking, think about, how many serving sizes that you want or how many people you will be making meals for. This, as you'll see, is a really good meal prep recipe to use, especially because it has a lot of flavor, and you would never expect it to have it, but it does. And it tastes really good, and over the longevity wise, it doesn't get bad over a long period of time. I remember when I was making the shepherd's pie, we had enough for 2 trays full, and concerning meal prep, we were able to have meals for example, lunch and dinner for about 5 days, and it didn't go bad at all. So that's kind of some things to think ahead if you're going to use this recipe for meal prep. But little tangent, side tangent. So besides that, now we're going to get to the next canned good, which is tomato puree. Again, it falls under that criteria you want to look for when it comes to selecting what tomato puree you want to use. You see if there is any options for organic, and you look at the sodium content. You can also look at the ingredients as well, just to make sure there's not anything they're putting in there that is not needed to go into your shepherd's pie. Now, once you have all your ingredients together, you can go ahead and start cooking your meat. Now, if you're a good multitasker, you could be doing all this simultaneously, which is totally fine. I just know personally for myself, I kind of struggle with one task at a time. So I cut up all my ingredients beforehand, and then I got to cooking the meat. That is normally used in a regular shepherd's pie is ground beef, which now in this day and age, trying to find ground beef that is lower in fat and higher in protein is totally, or not totally, but much easier to find now than was back, like 5-10 years ago. Also, too, if you want, which is a total possibility that you could choose to do, instead of using ground beef, although it won't be traditionally, a shepherd's pie, you can go ahead and use whatever lean ground meat you want to use. That's what's the great thing about, trying and testing different recipes. You can find what you like. One alternative that's actually big in my household, we don't use it a lot, but whenever, it's available, we use it, is either ground bison or ground elk. Both are really tasty and very low in fat. So if it's available, we try to, buy as many packages as possible and we stock up. But if not, the percentage we look for when buying ground beef is 96-4. So 96% lean ground beef, 4% fat. And just a little warning. Now, when they say those percentages, you can verify what the percentage is if you look on the nutrition label on the back. So you'll flip over whatever package of meat that you're buying, and if the ratios, is proven correct, so if the fat to protein ratio is exactly what it says on the front, you're good. And that's kind of something that people, I wouldn't say don't normally think about, but it doesn't come first to their mind that like, oh wait, let me just double check, because sometimes they'll say, for example, it's 90-10, and they'll go home and they'll see on the nutrition label that it's not 90-10, it's more like 85 or 80-20. So just be, mindful of that, especially if you're big into like counting calories or macros when it comes to fat and protein. That's a tool that you can put in your toolbox to better help you reach your goal. For this recipe, the first thing you're going to do is choose a pan that you want to cook your beef in. We're big fans of using cast irons just because it does enhance the flavor, and I just think it tastes better. What you'll do in whatever skillet or pan that you choose, you'll put about a tablespoon of oil, and then you will put in garlic. For this recipe, the tool that we had on hand is actually a little like spice grater. So I spiced up a few cloves of garlic to add to the cast iron skillet. Once you add the garlic to your pan or skillet of choice, you're going to let it brown for about a minute. And once that's done, go ahead and throw in your onion of choice. So for us, we're big red onion fans in this house, so we decided to add red onions. Just like the garlic, you want to make sure it's brown, but you want to be careful. And this is something now looking and watching this, I kind of wanted to do differently. A good rule is to put the onion in before the garlic, and that's because garlic burns so quickly. And no one, haven't met someone who likes the taste of burned garlic. I mean, if you put it in first, that's totally fine. But a good tip is put in onions first. They don't take as long to brown or potentially burn, and then put in your garlic. All right, once your onion and garlic are cooked to your liking, then you're going to add your ground meat. So again, you'll throw your ground meat of choice into your pan or skillet. I personally like to mix around the ground meat and the onions and garlic so they kind of are cohesive. And then once you've done that, you're going to add your seasoning. So for this specific recipe, the seasoning I added was salt, pepper, a pinch of rosemary, and garlic and onion powder. If you're not a big fan of garlic or onion, you don't have to add the garlic and onion powder. But if you are, go ahead and add it. Again, this recipe is all up to your liking. Once you've added the spices you wanted to your ground meat, go ahead and stir it again. That way, all the ground meat you're using has an equal spread of the spices. As this was going on, my potatoes were about done, or they were pretty much done. And now, after the potatoes are done, we're going to make them into mashed potatoes. So what I did for mashed potatoes is I had a KitchenAid and I threw them in there. And normally, or for mashed potatoes, when we're trying not to make them as healthy as possible, we just throw in butter and cream or milk and make it as rich. But for this recipe, we did something a little bit different. We added reduced fat cream cheese. Just like, when we're talking about the ground meats and stuff, when it says 50%, go ahead and check the label just to verify that whatever percentage of reduced fat it was, that it is. Once you determine what you're going to use for the low fat cream cheese, you're going to throw it in there with the cooked potatoes. Now, if you don't have a KitchenAid, that is totally okay. Go ahead and, old school, use a masher and mash the potatoes, which, hey, is actually a double benefit for you because you're getting a workout in at the same time, which is always a good thing. On top of that, yes, I used regular butter, but I measured it out enough to where you're tasting the butter within the potatoes or fulfilling the role that it's supposed to, but not overly much that it adds those extra calories to them. So I put the cream cheese and the butter in with the mashed potatoes. So I added the butter. I did a preliminary mixing with the KitchenAid. That way the potatoes would be mashed up or create a creamy consistency. Now, another little thing or trick, like I said, if we weren't trying to be healthier or make the potatoes on the healthy side, we would just use milk or cream to our liking. But for this, what I did was, yes, I did use buttermilk, but instead of randomly adding as much milk as needed, I kind of eyeballed it. So I did pour some into a cup initially and added it to the mix, but if no more buttermilk was needed, I was going to add any more. I just added enough to create the potatoes create that creaming consistency that is normally associated with mashed potatoes. After that, once everything was all mixed, I added some seasonings. We're such a big garlic household. I added some garlic powder directly to the mashed potatoes, as well as some salt. Once the spices were mixed in, did another mix with the KitchenAid, and that was it. That was how to make the creamy, more on the healthy side mashed potatoes. And outside of this shepherd's pie recipe, you can go ahead and make this healthy version of mashed potatoes for any meal or meal prep that you're planning to do in the future. Potatoes are done, veggies are ready to go. So whenever you notice that your ground meat is starting to brown and cook fully, go ahead and add tomato puree. Now you can add as little or as much of tomato puree as you want. It enhances the flavor of whichever ground meat you're using. You let the ground meat and tomato puree kind of mingle with each other for a little bit before adding your veggies. So go ahead and add your carrots, your peas, and your corn. Mix it together for that cohesion for the shepherd's pie. Depending on what skillet you're using, say if you're using an oven-safe skillet, you can directly add the mashed potatoes on top in the cast iron. But if not, you can take out the ground beef and veggie mixture and put it into, say, like a pan, an oven safe pan, or a cookie tin, and put the potatoes on that. Or once you put the mashed potatoes on top of your ground meat and veggies, you're going to put either your oven safe pan or skillet or your tin, cooking tin, into an already preheated 375 degree oven. Now, depending on what kind of oven you have, or how long it usually takes to cook something within your oven, the shepherd's pie will cook for anywhere from 20 to 30 minutes. What you're looking for is that golden brown crust on top of your potatoes, and that is a key to know, or a key that you can use to know that your shepherd's pie is done. And after waiting painstakingly for 20 to 30 minutes, you pull out your shepherd's pie and you'll see that gorgeous shepherd's pie that you have made. And let me tell you, it tastes better than it looks. Even though it will look pretty good, it's amazing, or an amazing recipe to make. After cooking it, the shepherd's pie, one thing I would recommend or try to avoid next time that I personally cook it is I would try to add as much beef as possible, and just do a thin layer of potatoes. When I put my shepherd's pie together, I did the opposite. I did a thin layer of ground beef and a thick layer of potatoes. It was still good, but I am, protein. I am a big fan of getting in as much protein as possible, and I don't want the potatoes to overpower the beef. I want a good mesh between the two. So that's my little, tip to myself that I'm going to use for next time. Now on to the second recipe. So the other healthy recipe that I'm going to be sharing with you guys is a healthy enchilada recipe. This surprisingly was a big hit in our house. And again, it's a very meal preppable dish. You can make as many enchiladas that you want, and you can prep this out for the week. The only downside is the longevity is not as long as the shepherd's pie, just because whatever tortillas you use, they kind of get soggy over a few days that is sitting in the fridge. So what I would say is make enough enchiladas for 2 or 3 days worth. The first step for making the enchiladas is we're going to dice up an onion. Now again, just like the recipe before, you can use whatever onion of your choosing or of your liking. For this recipe, we chose the white onion. Again, the same rules apply when you're using a cutting board. Go ahead and cut your fruits and vegetables first, and then cut your meat. There is a way to cut an onion to get into the smaller pieces. That is a pretty easy knife skill to learn. And for that, what you do is you first cut the onion in half and delayer the outer skin. Then you take one of those halves of the onion and put it on your cutting board, and you're going to cut that half of the onion 3 different ways. The first way is you're going to take your knife lengthwise and cut it one way to layers from top to bottom. You do a few layers that way, slice horizontally. Next, what you'll do is then you'll bring the knife to the top, cuts down the onion on the outside, so you cut it vertically. And then the third way is after you've done that, you're going to cut it vertically again, but this time your knife is pointing out in front of you. So to clarify it more, cut those vertical with the knife that's pointing parallel to you, and then the second time you cut vertically, the knife is pointing away from you. And it should cut up the onion into nice small pieces that will be easy to saute within a pan. If you didn't hear that on the video, be aware, whatever onion you choose, you may experience crying like I did. I remember, and I don't remember how well this worked, but whenever you cut onion, chew bubble gum or wear glasses. I don't know. I don't remember why, but chewing bubble gum helps you refrain from crying when you cut onions. But I digress. I got off on a side note. Now, the next thing I cut up was my garlic. Cutting up garlic can be kind of tricky just because garlic cloves can be small. And when considering safety, it could be a safety precaution just to think about. But the first thing to do is you want to take off that outer layer of the garlic clove. And one easy thing to do is you can either take your knife or a flat surface, put it on top of a garlic clove, and just smash down on it. What that does, it breaks out the outer skin and it makes it easier to peel off of the garlic clove. After you've done that, you can go ahead and chop up the garlic clove to the sizes of your liking. As you can see in the video, I have 2 pans ready to go for the homemade enchiladas. And the reason behind this was because my husband is not a big fan of some of the ingredients I use to make the enchiladas healthy. So one of these pans is the healthy enchiladas, and one of the pans are just the regular enchiladas. The cooking process is the same. From this point on, for the healthy enchiladas, the ingredients going into it are going to be a little different. So in each pan, what I did is I put olive oil in and some garlic and onion. And just like the last recipe, and after I'm watching this again, I would have rather put the onion in before the garlic, because the onion takes longer to cook and won't burn as quickly as the garlic cloves. I added the garlic, I added the onion, I did a kind of little chef's toss with both pans, made me feel more cool than I actually am. And then I added the ground beef. For the enchiladas, we actually used ground chicken, organic ground chicken, but you can use whatever ground meat that you want. Once you add your meat, go ahead and do a first blend of the meat and the garlic and onion so it's evenly spread out, and then you're going to add your seasoning. For this recipe, the seasoning I used was a little bit of salt, pepper, parsley, and oregano. And again, just like before, once you add the seasoning to the ground meat and onion and garlic mixture, you're going to go ahead and mix everything together. Now, depending on what kind of ground meat you're using will determine how long it takes until it browns and cooks. For this, the chicken, or since it is chicken, it does take a little longer. So it took, about 10 minutes to fully cook. But once it did, what you do next is you're going to add the cheese of your choosing. Like I said before, I had 2 different pans. One was the healthy version and was my husband's version. For the healthy version, the cheese that I added to the mixture was reduced fat cheddar jack cheese. You'll add your cheese, you'll mix your cheese and ground meat mixture together, and then you'll add your enchilada sauce of choosing. Now, I don't know how to make homemade enchilada sauce, and because of that, I just went to the store and bought the healthiest enchilada sauce I could find and added it to my beef mixture. Once you've added the enchilada sauce, don't add the whole can, because you want to save some of that sauce for when you put the enchiladas together and put it in the oven. So you want to use about 1/4 to 1/2 to mix in with your ground meat mixture, and you're going to put the rest aside. You add the sauce. After adding the enchilada sauce, you can add a few more seasonings. For us, what I did for both pans, I added onion powder, garlic powder, and chili powder. Again, if you're not a big onion or garlic flavor fan, you don't have to add it. If you are, add as much as you want. Chili powder, it's a love-hate relationship with me. I love spicy food, but sometimes whatever note is super spicy that I digest or I eat, I'll get hiccups. I added the chili powder to both enchiladas. I liked the mixture to kind of like co-mingle for a bit and kind of associate with one another, so the flavor sits in nicely with the ground beef mixture. Or not ground beef, ground chicken, my bad. But once that was done, now it's time to assemble the enchiladas. So for my husband enchiladas, I just put the ground meat mixture into regular tortillas. For the healthier ground meat mixture of enchilada, I went with a more carb balanced, fiber filled tortilla. Now, a little tip when you're choosing a healthier tortilla is look for a tortilla that is very high in fiber. The higher the tortilla or whatever bread or carb that you're going to eat or buy, the higher in fiber, the less actual carbs it will be. So for example, the tortilla I was using here it was 15 grams of carbs, but 12 grams of carbs was fiber. In order to determine what that macro would be, if you're going to count macros, you would take the overall carb number and subtract the fiber number from it to get your total net carbs. So for this example, 15 minus 12, the total net carbs for these tortillas was 3, which is amazing, and it was a really helpful tool when I was getting ready for this photo shoot. The more fiber-filled meals or fiber-filled foods I added into my day, the more full I would feel, but also too, that helped me keep my carb count down. For these enchiladas, I assemble it simply: tortilla, protein mixture, and on top, before the tortillas went into the oven, we poured over that extra enchilada sauce. Now, if you want to keep track of how much enchilada sauce you're putting on top of the enchiladas, that's totally fine. Go ahead and measure out how much enchilada sauce you want to add to your enchiladas to make it more either carb friendly, calorie friendly, or macro friendly. Along with the enchilada sauce, you can also put on whatever cheese that you would like to go with your enchiladas. Again, for me, I used a reduced fat cheddar jack option. Sprinkle that on top. And then both pans went into a 375 degree already preheated oven. Just like the last recipe, everything is mainly cooked. The only thing that you're looking for to be cooked is that the cheese is melted and the tortillas are soft. Once that's done, you take the enchiladas out of the oven and ba-bam! You got yourself healthy enchiladas. And that's it. Those are 2 healthy recipes that help me get ready for the photo shoot. They're fun, they're tasty, they're easy to make, and they last, a good number of days in the fridge. So that's it when it comes to recipes for the photo shoot. If you guys want us to post more healthy recipes on the channel, go ahead and comment below. Go ahead, like, subscribe, leave your comment, and stay tuned for next week's fitness photo shoot behind the scene episode.